You could be forgiven for thinking that if someone knocks on your door in the middle of the night, they're either drunk, lost, or trying to break in. But what if I told you there was something else? Something evil out there that comes knocking when you least expect it. This is one of those videos where if you hear someone knocking at 3:33 a.m., don't answer. Because the creature that might be waiting on the other side of that door might be the stuff of nightmares. Welcome back, everybody, to my channel. Today we take a look at why knocking on a stranger-ass door in the middle of the night can end your life. If you haven't already, go ahead and hit that like button, and let's get started. Let me preface this by saying there's nothing wrong with going to sleep at 9 p.m. In fact, I think everyone should try to get more sleep. But since this story revolves around 3:33 a.m., I need to explain why that time is so important. Now before I continue, you've probably heard the phrase, beware of dog. So you're probably not surprised that dogs make regular appearances on lists like this. That's because they can sense things we humans can't, especially danger. Well, many cultures have similar sayings and superstitions about animals that could foretell an approaching disaster. For example, the Japanese believe that if a cat crosses your path from front to back, then bad luck is on its way. The ancient Greeks believed that if a rooster crowed inside the house, then death was imminent. And some Native American tribes believe that hearing an owl hoot at night means someone close to you is going to die soon. Now, all these beliefs obviously vary from person to person, culture to culture, but one thing is universal. If you see or hear an animal you weren't expecting to at night, you're going to think twice about ignoring it. But what if you lived somewhere where you never saw any wild animals? What if you lived in a city where the closest thing to wildlife you saw were pigeons and rats? Well, it just so happens that if you live in a place like that, you're even more likely to freak out when you see an animal because you know they do not belong there. Take, for example, what happened to a man who called the police after seeing a black bear wandering around his backyard in New Jersey. Even though black bears aren't native to New Jersey, they do occasionally wander into the state from neighboring Pennsylvania. But seeing one in your backyard is still a shock, especially when it's 3:33 a.m. This story comes from August 2014 when a resident in the Pine Barrens section of New Jersey called local police after he and his family spotted a black bear in his backyard. The bear was big, maybe 6 feet tall, and it kept trying to get into his trash cans. Being a responsible pet owner, he had his 2 dogs in the house and turned on all the lights outside. But that didn't stop the bear. It kept trying to get into the trash. So the man went to his window to watch it. He said the bear kept opening the lids of the trash cans with its paws, tipping them over and tearing through the garbage. After the man called the police, they set up a perimeter around the neighborhood and used tranquilizer darts to subdue the bear. Once they got it into the woods, they found a collar on it. Turns out the bear belonged to a traveling circus nearby. They must have left their cage door open, and the bear wandered off while the circus was performing. After the incident, the police advised people to keep their trash cans in their garages at night to avoid attracting bears or other unwanted guests. That story may not sound scary, but there are plenty of other examples of what you should never do if you hear someone knocking at 3:33 a.m. We've already talked about how knocking on the wrong door in the middle of the night could lead to encountering a wild animal. But what if the knocking came from inside your house? Imagine you re-sleeping in your bed, and suddenly you hear a knock coming from inside your own home. It sounds like someone or something is walking around your house, knocking on walls, doors, and cabinets. What would you do? Would you investigate or just pull the covers over your head and pretend like you're not hearing anything? Well, whatever you do, you shouldn't ignore the sound. A lot of times when people hear unexplained noises in their houses, they just blame pipes or mice. But this story shows that you should always take these sounds seriously. In November 2014, a woman in Alabama woke up in her bedroom and heard what she thought were footsteps in her living room. At first, she assumed it was her husband, but she knew he was on a business trip. She also knew it wasn't a mouse because she'd recently had her house exterminated. So what was making the noise? As the footsteps got closer to her bedroom, she started screaming for help. Then whatever was making the noise stopped. Thinking it was all in her head, she eventually calmed down and went back to bed. But the next morning when she got up, she found strange scratches on her bedroom wall. At first she thought her dog made them, but when she looked outside, she noticed claw marks in her garden. Realizing she was in danger, she called her pastor for help, and he spent all day with her, locking all the doors and windows. She didn't want to leave the house for fear of what was out there, but thankfully, her husband flew home early and stayed with her until she felt safe again. To this day, nobody knows what made those mysterious footsteps or left those claw marks. But she never hears anything now because she moved away. Now, not every story like this has such a happy ending. There are plenty of other instances where people open their doors to whatever was knocking, only to suffer horrible fates. So what exactly could be lurking out there waiting to get inside your house? Well, the answer may surprise you. In folklore, the devil often disguises himself as a stranger, or sometimes a handsome gentleman, and goes door to door looking for people to make deals with. He offers them wealth, power, and fame in exchange for their souls. Sometimes he just outright tells them what he wants, and sometimes he hides it behind riddles or challenges. Either way, the deal is always the same. If the person accepts, they'll get everything they ever wanted, but they'll have to pay for it with their immortal soul. The most famous example of this is the legend of Faust, a German nobleman who sold his soul to the devil in exchange for unlimited knowledge and power. In exchange, the devil gave him a magical book which gave him the ability to understand the language of birds, beasts, and even angels. With this knowledge, he became incredibly powerful and wealthy. But in the end, he lost his soul and became the property of the devil. And while stories like this may seem like harmless fairy tales, there are real-life examples of people who made similar deals and suffered similar fates. Take, for example, the story of Ed Gein, a serial killer from Wisconsin who was obsessed with the occult. While searching his house, police found evidence that he had made a pact with the devil. They found pentagrams drawn on his walls, skulls hanging from trees, and even an altar in his basement. But what they didn't find was any trace of his victims. That's because Gein never tried to hide the fact that he was a serial killer, nor did he ever try to cover up his crimes. In fact, he was proud of what he'd done, and he even invited investigators to take a look at his collection of body parts. When they asked him why he killed so many people, he replied, "Some people collect auto parts, or stamps. I like to collect ladies' bodies." Obviously, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that Gein wasn't just a serial killer. He was actually possessed by the devil himself. This brings us back to the original question. What should you do if you hear someone knocking at 3:33 a.m.? Well, if it's coming from inside your house, you should definitely not answer. But if it's coming from outside, then it depends on the situation. If it's a stormy night and you know there's no one outside, then you should probably just ignore it. It's most likely just the wind or some other natural phenomenon. But if it's a dark and moonless night and you live deep in the woods, then you may want to reconsider. After all, there are plenty of dangerous creatures out there, both real and imaginary, that come out at night, and knocking on your door is just their way of saying hello. So remember, if you hear someone knocking at 3:33 a.m., don't answer unless you want the devil to move in next door. Thank you for watching. I'm your host, and I'll see you next time.